Good morning and welcome to the information session number 2 on the request for proposal for the new Best Starts for Kids Childcare Subsidy Program. My name is Katie Kaiser and I'm one of the Childcare Subsidy Program Managers at King County. I'm joined today by a few of my colleagues who I will let introduce themselves now. Jessica, do you go first?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Jessica Tolinar-Cafferty, and I'm the Child Care Policy Lead.
Steph?
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Ospina-Velez, and I'm the co-lead for the Best Starts for Kids Child Care Subsidy Program with Katie.
And then Joanna.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joanna Armstrong, and I am the RFP lead, so I'll be the one you'll direct any questions and concerns to.
So Steph and Joanna will be monitoring the chat for questions, and Jessica will be co-presenting with me in just a moment. So just a quick overview of the agenda for today. We'll start with a brief overview of the Best Starts for Kids initiative and levy, as well as the new childcare strategies within it. Then we'll review key elements of this particular request for proposal. We'll review each role in the proposal materials that create a complete application. And then it's my goal to get through our slides as quickly as possible and leave a lot of time for question and answers at the end. A little bit about logistics and how you can ask questions that you have during our presentation. Please feel free to add your questions to the Zoom chat box. And during the Q&A session, you are also welcome to unmute and ask your questions during that time. If there is a particular question needed for clarity about what I've just said that is entered in the chat, Steph will interrupt me and I'll address it right then. But for the most part, we're going to be taking the questions from the chat and then waiting until the Q&A section to answer them. You also, if you think of a question after the fact or as you're reviewing the RFP outside of this info session, you can email Joanna at dchscontracts@kingcounty.gov. And all of the questions that we receive through email, the questions we received in the first info session, in this info session, they will all be recorded in writing, and the official answers to those questions will be recorded and posted as an addendum to the RFP in Zoom grants. So just to be clear, everybody who is interested in applying for this RFP will have the answers to every question that any interested party asked. And the info session that we had last week is the same information that we are sharing with you today. Okay, and now I will turn it over to Jessica to do a brief overview of Best Starts for Kids.
Great, thank you, Katie. So good morning. I am just going to share a little bit about Best Starts for Kids as a framework, and then how we got to where we are now. So I like to start any conversation about Best Starts coming back to what we really ground ourselves in, which is this idea of happy, healthy, safe, and thriving. We want to see babies born healthy, kiddos thrive, and young people grow up to be happy, healthy, successful adults. And this philosophy is really what guides all of our work. Next slide, please. And so our mission is to strengthen families and communities, recognizing this sort of goal of happy, healthy, safe, and thriving, and really investing upstream in the goodness that exists in our kids, families, and community. Next slide, please. We also are grounded in an equity statement developed by our Children Youth Advisory Board, which is our governing body. The equity statement is longer than what you see here, and there's a link in this slide to the full equity statement, but some key components of this idea are that equity is not an end place. It's an ardent journey towards well-being, and it's as defined by the affected, excuse me. We also believe that equity is disruptive. It's not comfortable and it's not voluntary, but it is necessary. And equity is fundamental to the community we want to build. Next slide, please. And so this idea of an ardent journey toward well-being, once again, is sort of what guides us through any of this work, recognizing that it's not a landing place or a resting place, but a continuous process as defined by those most affected. Next slide, please. We also follow Best Starts follows the King County Equity and Social Justice Strategic Plan, which recognizes that we have inequities across our county, especially by race and place, that we have this sort of immense wealth and prosperity in our region, and that for many people, it actually does not look that way. For many folks, it's actually getting harder. And so we're working to address that by investing in organizations that are reflective of and embedded in the communities they serve. And really thinking about how they can recognize and address both disparities, but also really build on the assets, ingenuity, and strength of those communities to do their work. Next slide, please. One of the things that's unique about Best Starts is our desire to sort of move upstream. We recognize that a lot of work that we do in public health and social services is focused on sort of reducing harm or addressing the bad. We think that work continues to be important and will be until we live in a truly equitable world, but it's really not the focus of Best Starts. Instead, our path is really about moving upstream and doing 4 key things. The first is promotion of the good. We know many of the things that are good for kiddos, good for families, good for community, and how can we invest in and strengthen those things? The second is prevention. So that is, how do we prevent the bad? How do we build in protective factors? How do we support families and community? The third is early intervention. So when we think about, for example, kiddos early on who might need additional supports, making sure that they have the resources they need quickly and effectively. And the last is policy and systems change. So we recognize that we're doing some pretty cool work and that it needs to be much bigger than just us. So working to create systems change that is broader and more institutionalized, that can sort of live much longer than Best Starts. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share just a little bit of background on how we ended up here. Childcare has been sort of a growing area of prioritization at the county over the last few years. We did actually have a comprehensive childcare program back in the 90s, which was discontinued due to funding. And so it is exciting to see this investment growing once again. I would say it really first came on the radar in a significant way back in 2018 when the Women's Advisory Board released a report identifying childcare access and affordability as major barriers to equity. The executive and council then convened a pretty wonderful task force, the Children and Families Strategy Task Force in 2019, made up of childcare providers, systems folks, home visitors, parents, all kinds of folks who had a vested interest in childcare, and asked them to look at access and affordability recommendations for the county. They actually said, we're not just going to look at access and affordability, we're going to look at how to build a holistic and strong system, an equitable system of care. And they developed a report that includes 20 recommendations that they submitted to council and the executive in 2020. Next slide, please. A few key things came out of that report. As I mentioned, there were 20 recommendations that really ranged from sort of key foundational principles like anti-racist principles in programming and how we raise and use revenue, all the way to sort of really tactical and strategic investments that the county can make. So a very broad range. In terms of some of the programmatic recommendations, a couple ones that stood out that really informed the Best Starts investment were a recommendation to invest in equitable wages and benefits. That is something that we are hoping to begin working on through our workforce demonstration pilot later this year. And the second was financial supports for King County families in order to access childcare. I do want to just share that one of the things that really guides us is that idea of race and place. And the task force was also really interested in how we continue building comprehensive supports for Black and Brown providers and men in the field. We know that the field is disproportionately made up of women of color, and really wanting to strengthen and support the incredible expertise and work that exists here. Next slide, please. Okay, that's me. I'm going to pass it back to Katie.
Thank you, Jessica. And now we get into some specifics about the funding that we're talking about today. So the Best Starts for Kids Childcare Subsidy Program is funded by the Best Starts for Kids levy. This is the second iteration of the levy. It was approved by voters in August of 2021, and it will run for the next 6 years. So from 2022 to 2027. And the total 6-year funding for the childcare subsidy is about $160 million. This particular RFP is contracting for $73.7 million over the next 3 years, with the option and the chance that the contracts will be extended an additional 3 years. So the contract period we're looking at is roughly July of this year to the end of June of 2025. And I will get into specific funding maximums in a later slide, depending on the funding maximums for each scope of work. So the timeline for this particular request for proposal, it was released about a week and a half ago on March 4th. We've had this is our second of 2 info sessions. And the deadline to contact us with questions is this coming Friday. And I'll talk on the next slide about technical assistance, but the deadline to request free technical assistance with your application is March 30th. The application will be due on April 13th, it's a Wednesday, at 2 p.m. Following the submission of the applications, we will rate and review all complete applications in the last 2 weeks of April. There will be interviews for the top scoring subsidy administrator and family access and support team coordinator positions sometime in the week of May 2nd. And those applicants will be notified the last week in April if they are having an interview. We intend to notify applicants of the status of their application around the end of May. We plan to do contract discussions in June and potential contract start dates in July. So for Best Starts for Kids request for proposal, we offer free technical assistance that will be available through March 30th for this RFP to support organizations and eliminate barriers that might prevent organizations from seeking funding. Just so that you're aware, technical assistance providers are not grant writers, but they can assist you in determining the appropriate fit between your proposal and this funding opportunity. They can provide guidance on how best to answer questions. They can support your proposal development, including editing and support with the budget. And they can support you in explaining your proposal in the most clear and concise way. I think we might have a few of our technical assistance consultants on the line. If you are on the line, if you could just come off mute and come on camera and just say hello for a moment. Just introduce yourself. Do we have anyone?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Swime Cribe, and I am a team member with Dicentra Consulting. And there are 3 of us with Dicentra, myself, Karen Colgill, and Ashanafi Cherkos. So we are here and we're happy to assist any organization that needs technical assistance. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. So in order to ensure that we the best support for possible applicants, if you could please reach out to technical assistance providers as early as possible after the RFP opens. So now, they may be able to accommodate last minute requests on an as needed basis, but they're better able to provide the full amount of time and support to applicants who submit their requests earlier. I'm going to put a link in the chat to a blog post that introduces all of the technical assistance consultants. You can also find this information in attachment F of the RFP. It introduces all of our technical assistance consultants. We ask that you contact one of them at a time and give them at least 24 hours to respond before seeking another provider. We welcome applicants' desire to find the right fit with your organization. And if you've connected with a technical assistance provider and decide to work with someone else, please just inform the initial provider directly. So to discuss a little bit about the funding objectives that we have for this RFP. The purpose of this funding is to create a new childcare subsidy program in King County that centers and prioritizes the needs of families, that advances equity and eliminates disparities in childcare access, that provides seamless and low barrier user experience for all families and childcare providers, that demonstrates a commitment to the well-being and sustainability of our childcare providers, that prioritizes continuous quality improvement and integration of family, community, and provider feedback, and that partners with key stakeholders to build on existing subsidy programs and fill eligibility gaps to expand equitable access. And finally, we know that the next several years are going to be a very dynamic childcare landscape that might include new funding, increasing costs, shifting eligibility. So we need a program that is dynamic and can adapt to that shifting landscape. I want to let you know that these funding objectives, these are informed by a lot of input and beautiful vision from our community members, our subject matter experts, including the Family and Children's Strategy Task Force and the work group for this RFP. So these objectives also inform many of the rating criteria for this RFP. And so I suggest, in addition to becoming really familiar with the rating criteria, really ground yourself in these funding objectives as you develop your proposals. So just to give you a sense of the families in King County that the program plans to serve, this program will be prioritizing families who are not served by existing public subsidies and for whom childcare is still unaffordable. This includes families living just above the income eligibility for existing public subsidies, such as the state's Working Connections childcare program, and families who are below the income cutoff but are ineligible for or not well served by these programs. An example of that might be if a family has a child who is undocumented, they are not eligible for the state childcare subsidy, but may be income eligible. And that would be a family that would be served by the Best Starts for Kids childcare subsidy program. In addition to that, they would need to reside in King County. They need to have a gross household income that falls below 85% of the state median income. That's SMI. 85% of state median income roughly corresponds to 80% of King County's median income, which is currently the cutoff for low-income housing supports in our county. Families need to have one or more children between ages of birth to 12, and they need to be ineligible for Working Connections childcare subsidy or not well served by existing programs, and that would be determined on a case-by-case basis. So to ensure that the program is minimizing existing disparities in childcare access, Best Starts will prioritize funding agencies. So this is a priority that we will have in funding agencies for this RFP, who demonstrate culturally responsive and relationship-based approaches to serving the families and children on this slide. These are these are the families in King County that our community members, our subject matter experts, our research has shown have disparate access to childcare, and have really and whom we really want to prioritize with this new program. So who should apply for this RFP? This request is open to organizations serving King County who want to help administer the subsidy program. That includes for-profit and nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, tribes and tribal organizations, public and governmental agencies. It was our intention in designing the RFP the way that we did to ensure that organizations of any size could be competitive for funding through this RFP. So we encourage small nonprofits and community-based organizations to apply. Just a point of clarification, this request is to identify the organizations who want to help build, administer, and promote the new regional childcare subsidy program. So these are the organizations that will work together to create the infrastructure for this program. The operational details of how eligibility will be determined, how families will be prioritized for funding, how much funding each eligible family will receive, that will all be determined in the coming months before the program becomes available to the public. So at this stage, if you are looking for support for specific children or specific childcare programs, this is not the stage at which you would be seeking funding. This scope of work, or this request for proposal, is for organizations that want to help carry out one of the 3 scopes of work defined in this request for proposal. So this is where we get into the scopes of work that we are contracting in this proposal. This RFP will identify and fund applicants to fill 3 distinct roles that will implement the Best Starts childcare subsidy program in King County. For proposal materials broken out by role, you can see attachments A, B, and C of the RFP. Proposal materials include an application checklist, the scope of work, meaning what is it that we are asking you to do, the narrative questions, and the rating criteria for each role. So I'm going to walk through a brief description of each of the roles and talk a little bit about how they all fit together. So the Family Access and Support Team will provide outreach, application assistance, and relationship-based childcare access and support for families. The intention is that every family who that applies for the subsidy will be connected to someone on the Family Access and Support Team as they navigate the subsidy. I will say that we are anticipating a connection between the Family Access and Support Team members and the Help Me Grow initiative in King County. Help Me Grow King County is a community-driven resource and referral linkage system that guides families through the array of available services to connect children and their caregivers to appropriate, accessible, and timely services and support. And so it's a network across King County, and we're excited to see the ways the Family Access and Support Team can connect with Help Me Grow. We anticipate there being sort of 2 levels of support within the Family Access and Support Team. General navigation support will provide customer service and basic technical assistance to families as they apply for, enroll in, and use the subsidy. Some examples of this general navigation support would include checking on the status of a family's application, providing applicants with consultation on eligibility for other public subsidies, helping them switch their childcare providers if they need to, and then maybe changing between school year and summertime care if providers or rates need to change. The second level of family access and support team support would be case management support. And this would be provided for families who experience additional barriers to access and need deeper, more sustained support to apply for and use the subsidy. Case management support services would include those services offered under general navigation, but also include services such as childcare vacancy checks, basic needs referrals, and connection to developmental supports. The Family Access and Support Team will also have a coordinator that will be contracted through this RFP. The coordinator will be responsible for developing and managing outreach materials and strategy, convening the Family Access and Support Team for training and practice alignment, and balancing team caseloads. And finally, we have the subsidy administrator role, star number 3 here. The subsidy administrator will be responsible for hosting the subsidy application and the data management system. They will verify eligibility and provide subsidies to childcare providers on behalf of families. So the subsidy administrator will be the role that is passing the money from King County through to the childcare providers that are selected by eligible families. And so you can see on this diagram here, with the families at the top, we have the pink line represents application for subsidy. So that will go directly to the subsidy administrator. Then on the right here, we have the Family Access and Support Team with their coordinator that will be offering support services, these blue arrows, before application, during application, and all through using the subsidy. The green arrows here represent what Best Starts at King County will be funding. They will be directly funding the organizations on the Family Access and Support Team. They will be directly funding the subsidy administrator. And the subsidy administrator will then be paying the childcare providers selected by eligible families. Please note, applicants may apply for more than one role. Applying for one or applying for multiple roles will not impact the competitiveness of your application. You are encouraged to apply for the role or the roles that are aligned with your interest and capacity. If you are applying for more than one role, you will have to submit a separate application in Zoom Grants for each role. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. You will be able to use the same basic information about your organization for both proposals, but you will have to physically submit a second proposal if you apply for more than one role. The one exception to this is the Family Access and Support Team Coordinator. Applicants for the coordinator role must also submit an application for either the FAST team or the subsidy administrator. So what we're saying here is that we anticipate that the FAST team coordinator will live either with the organization that is the subsidy administrator or with an organization that is hosting Family Access and Support Team members. They would not stand alone in their own organization. So if you're applying for that role, you must apply for one of the other roles. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of what families will experience interacting with this system, I have a few examples, a few sample family experiences. So for family number 1, they learn about the subsidy through a flyer at their childcare. They follow the link to the application. They complete the application and are approved for subsidy by the subsidy administrator. The subsidy administrator connects them to a Family Access and Support Team member to be their contact for any questions or needs that they might have while using the subsidy. And so that's an example of a family coming in through the child or the subsidy administrator, and then being connected to general navigation support on the family access and support team. Family number 2 is a current client at one of the family access and support teams organization. They learn about the subsidy through that organization. The FAST team member helps them complete the application for subsidy and find a childcare provider that meets the needs of their family. In that case, the family comes in through the FAST team organization. They're supported in their application by that particular team member, and then that team member remains their contact through the time that they are using the subsidy. Now, for family number 3, they learn about the subsidy when they learn they are not eligible for the state subsidy because they are looking for work. They apply for the Best Starts subsidy and indicate that their child has complex medical needs and that they are having a hard time finding childcare that can meet their child's needs. The subsidy administrator connects that family with a FAST team member who can offer case management services to use the subsidy and access childcare. So in this case, the family applies directly with the subsidy administrator, and through the course of the application indicates that they may have greater barriers to accessing care. And so the subsidy administrator would refer them to a FAST team member who has experience in supporting children with complex medical needs so that they have more support in accessing care. Okay, so this is an overview of the available funding for each of the roles. So you can see here that the FAST team, we anticipate and hope that there will be multiple contracts for this scope of work, and that the total over the course of a 3-year period will be about $4.47 million. And we anticipate about 15 FTEs on the family access and support team. For the family access and support team coordinator, we anticipate a contract with one organization for this role. And the 3-year total for this role is about $588,000. For the subsidy administrator, I want to make it clear that this includes the subsidy pass-through dollars. So this includes all of the money that will be coming from the county and going directly to pay childcare providers on behalf of eligible families. We also anticipate one contract for this role with a total funding over a 3-year period of $68.7 million. The FAST coordinator and the subsidy administrator roles will each be, like I said, one contract. So as you develop proposals or budgets for these roles, be sure you are proposing to carry out the whole scope of work for up to the total amount of funding. The FAST team role may be awarded to multiple organizations, so be sure your budget is proportional to the number of FTEs you are requesting. That $4.47 million is the total for about 15 FTEs for the full 3 years. If you request the full amount, your proposal should include capacity to serve all children using the subsidy program. And we ask you, and we talk about this later on, to prepare a 3-year budget with your proposal. Okay, so a few tips on navigating the RFP. As you are likely aware now, the RFP is in Zoom Grants and proposals will be submitted through Zoom Grants. In order to find the proposal materials for each role, you will find them in the attachment section of the RFP. So this is the starting page when you log into Zoom Grants. And you'll see there is a tab that says Show Library. When you click on the Show Library tab, it will give you all of the documents associated with this RFP. So the RFP itself, this first file, includes program background and overview, timeline, the application process, a glossary of terms, which if you are wondering what a term means, that should be the first place that you go. It defines most terms that are used in the RFP. And then you'll also find the King County boilerplate contract terms in the RFP. The proposal materials for each role can also be found in this attachment section. So you can see that attachment A is the FAST team proposal materials, attachment B is the coordinator materials, attachment C is the subsidy administrator materials. Attachment D is one of an additional requirement for the subsidy administrator. Attachment E is the budget template, and attachment F is where we introduce the technical assistance consultants for the applicants. The proposal materials, as I mentioned before, include an application checklist, the narrative questions for each role, the rating criteria, and references, and then any additional requested documents that depend on the role you're applying for. So a note about the RFP rating and review process. All complete proposals submitted will go through a formal review process. The review panel will closely follow the scoring rubric, the rating rubric found in each of the roles' proposal materials. The review panel will be comprised of King County staff, external subject matter experts, community members, which in this case include parents and childcare providers, members of the Children and Youth Advisory Board, which is the governing body for Best Starts, and members or designees of the King County Council, who will serve as non-voting members. Due to the critical nature of the scoring rubric found in each section, please carefully review the rating criteria for each role and be sure that your narrative of questions address the criteria associated with them. So some tips on navigating the rating criteria. This far left column is the narrative questions. And so this is what you're responding to in your proposal. And this is the information that we will be using to assign a rating based on the criteria. So please read them carefully. Some of them have a couple parts. Be sure that you're addressing all of the parts to the questions. So this middle column here that is titled Rating Criteria Description for a score of 5 out of 5 points. So each rating criteria box that you see here will be given a score out of 5 points. These descriptions describe a 5 out of 5 points. This column that's titled Weight, this gives an indication of how important the rating criteria is. And the more important, the bigger weight it has. The total possible score is a 5 times the weight, and then that gives you the score. So for example, if you were to get a 4 out of 5 rating on this rating criteria, then we would multiply your score 4 times 2, and you would have gotten a score of 8 out of a possible score of 10. Then all of the scores for all of the rating criteria will be added up, and each application, each proposal will be given a total score. Okay, now I'm going to get on to the proposal materials and applications for each of the roles. So for the Family Access and Support Team role, a complete application includes the summary questions, which are just a series of questions about your organization, contact information, etc. An acknowledgement of King County's vaccine mandate, completed narrative questions, a completed budget template, and a list of 2 to 3 references. In the case of the FAST team, the references are parents or caregivers that the applicant has supported in the past who would be willing to talk about the applicant's work with us. Some important things to remember about the Family Access and Support Team role. Families may come through the organization first, or they may come through the subsidy administrator first. So I think it's very important to remember that the staff members proposed for the FAST team should expect to serve both families that come in through their own organization and serve referrals from the subsidy administrator. Because the purpose of the FAST team is to provide customer service and support to all children and families accessing the subsidy, regardless of how they come in the door. And the FAST team organizations that propose FAST team members, you can propose between 1 to 15 FTEs for this scope of work. So it is really the level of participation and engagement with this project that you want as an organization. Please describe the level of support you will provide and the number of children served per FTE. So as you are proposing FTEs, please let us know whether they would be providing general navigation support or case management support, and how many children would be served per FTE. Also, as I mentioned before, we are hoping to foster a connection between the FAST team and the Help Me Grow initiative at King County. So we are offering 5 bonus points for current contractors with Help Me Grow King County. So please be sure to indicate whether you currently receive a Help Me Grow contract from King County. And I just want to let you know that any questions that we receive, we will answer during the Q&A session. I have one question that came in through direct message. So for the Family Access and Support Team Coordinator role, a complete application includes summary questions, the acknowledgement of the vaccine mandate, completed narrative questions. You will notice that it includes several questions where you may opt to upload as a file. So there are a few questions that give you the option to say, I uploaded this as a Word document or as a PDF. And so just know that for a few of the questions, that's an option for you. Please complete a budget template. For the Family Access and Support Team Coordinator role, because you have to apply in conjunction with another role, the Family Access and Support Team Coordinator's budget template is an optional section of either the Family Access and Support Team budget or the Subsidy Administrator budget. So it is not its own tab. You would include it as an addendum to whatever other role you're applying for. We also ask for a list of 2 to 3 references who should be individuals from nonprofit organizations or community members with whom the applicant has partnered in the past and who would be willing to talk to us about the applicant's work. And then again, to have a complete application for the coordinator role, you must complete an application for either the subsidy administrator or the FAST team role as well. Some important things to remember about the FAST team coordinator role. Please propose full staffing required to carry out this scope of work. So this role may not and probably should not be just 1 FTE. You should propose the staffing structure that you believe will effectively carry out this scope of work within the maximum funding limits. That includes coordination of the FAST team. It includes developing outreach materials and strategies. So be sure to propose the full staffing required to carry out this scope of work. Again, indicate whether you currently receive a Help Me Grow contract from King County. That will result in 5 bonus points for this role as well. And you must apply for a second role. So if you apply for the Family Access and Support Team Coordinator and do not submit an application for a second role, it will not be considered a complete application. So the Subsidy Administrator role. A complete application includes the summary questions, the acknowledgement of the vaccine mandate, completed narrative questions. Again, a few of the questions have the option to upload them as files. The Subsidy Administrator must also complete the technical requirements assessment document that I'll go over in the next slide. Complete the budget template and then a reference list. The references for the Subsidy Administrator should include at least one from each of the following categories. A funder with whom the applicant has contracted to distribute financial assistance, and a community member who received services from the applicant in the past and who would be willing to talk with us about the applicant's work. So one additional requirement of the Subsidy Administrator application is the technical requirements assessment. And this is where we get a sense of the system that you have in place to be able to manage the applications, the data for families and childcare providers, and then how you pay childcare providers. And so in this top the header section will give a role or give the user of the system and say this user can complete a preliminary screening to determine eligibility before submitting a full application. And then you would say whether your system currently meets the requirement. If so, describe the capability. Screenshots are welcome and encouraged in this section. Or if you don't currently meet the requirement, how do you plan to develop it? This document is available as a Word document so that you can modify it in the attachments. If your system does not currently meet the requirements and you would not be able to develop that, please let us know. It's not a deal breaker. This is us trying to get a sense of where the systems currently are at for those proposing to carry out the Subsidy Administrator role. Some important things to remember for the administrator role. Your budget should clearly show the percentage of the total funds that will be passed through as subsidy. So we want a very clear sense of how much of the total funds would go to your operational expenses and what percentage of the total funds will be passed through as payments to childcare providers. Please note in the boilerplate contract terms in the RFP, there are additional insurance requirements for the Subsidy Administrator that are above what is required for the other two roles. Subsidy Administrator applicants, the proposal should communicate a clear plan for how you would work with the FAST team, deep understanding of family and provider pain points or challenges in the current system, and how your approach works to mitigate or address those challenges. And it should communicate a plan for soliciting and integrating feedback from community providers and families to continuously improve program quality. A quick note about evaluation for this project. Because most of the data reporting responsibilities will lie with the Subsidy Administrator, because the Subsidy Administrator will be hosting this central data system that will have the application data about families and the payments and all of that, there will likely be little quantitative reporting required from the FAST team. That said, all contractors will be expected to participate in King County or third-party led evaluation and continuous improvement activities around this program. including amplifying family feedback and providing constructive feedback for the subsidy program and administrator. So a few tips about the application as we think about Zoom grants. If you are applying for more than one role, you must create an application in Zoom grants for each role. And you must submit a separate proposal because they have separate narrative questions, they have separate rating criteria. Knowing what we do about Zoom grants and its usability, we would recommend composing responses to the narrative questions in a Word document and then transferring your questions to Zoom grants. This will ensure that you do not accidentally lose or not save responses that have been entered directly into Zoom grants. And then it also will be helpful because of the skip logic in Zoom grants. So you'll notice that one of the first questions it asks you is, what role are you applying for? And based on your answer to that question, it's going to change all of the questions that you see. So the question numbering in Zoom grants will not likely correspond with the question numbering in the proposal materials. So just be aware of that. And like I said, I think composing your responses, I would have the proposal materials open next to me with the narrative questions that have the rating criteria right next to them. And I would compose my answers with that open next to me and then just transfer them into Zoom grants once they're final. If you have trouble with Zoom grants, please contact Zoom grants tech support. However, if your trouble with Zoom grants puts you at risk of missing the RFP deadline, please reach out to our RFP lead, Joanna, and you may email the proposal directly to her if you are running the risk of missing the deadline because of technical problems with Zoom grants. So some tips on the budget. Please be sure to read the instructions for each role. The budgets should be developed for the length of the contract term, which is 3 years. Your budgets should include the total cost necessary to carry out the scope of work of the role you're applying for. So for example, if you're requesting a few FTE for the family access and support team, include in your budget the cost to supervise those staff members as well. The templates are suggestions, so please feel free to modify, to add or delete line items as works best for your organization and how you present budgets. Okay, so just a recap of where we go from here. So you can email questions that you have that are not answered on today or that you think of. You can email questions to DCHS contracts@kingcounty.gov. Contact the technical assistance providers directly for support. And like I said, there's the link in the chat that goes to a blog post that has all their contact information. Attachment F in the RFP has their contact information and an introduction of each of the consultants. The glossary of terms is a really helpful place to get the definitions of terms used in the RFP. And please use the checklist for each role to make sure that your application is complete. All right, so we will now open the floor for questions. I'm going to quickly respond to a question that I got in a direct message. If there are multiple FAST teams or FAST team members, how are families assigned? That's a great question. And that is definitely more of an operational question that we will leave up to the subsidy administrator, who we contract for the subsidy administrator and the family access and support team coordinator. Those types of operational those types of operational strategies and kind of nuts and bolts will be determined once we have contractors in place. Stop sharing my screen.
Hi, Katie. I'm Adam Burden. I work with David at Scholar Fund. And my question is in regards to undocumented folks that apply. I know that there's a threshold that the county or people who deal with money often want when it comes to verification of address and income. When the FAST team meets to design everything, how much wiggle room is there to do self-attestation or things like that in terms of verifying address and income to make sure that we have an equitable lens? And then an additional question, sorry, while I have the mic, or so to speak, the window. How much involvement would the administrative team have in designing? Because we administer funds, but we're also really interested in how the application is designed and how the program runs. Because like our whole thing is matching people's needs with the opportunities. And so I'm just curious in terms of the involvement piece and then in the self-attestation piece for undocumented folks.
Yeah, so I think we anticipate a fair amount of collaboration around operations within the, the priorities and general parameters laid out by our community work groups, by our implementation plan. So I think to answer your question, we see quite a lot of collaboration around tools such as an application. Best Starts for Kids is very intentional and very thoughtful around information requested from families for services. And so that is something we're very open to discussing and working through, is the level of verification documents required for participation in the program. And again, that's something I think that we will, get more specific and more, and more operational details as we have a contractor and are working through opening this for access to the public.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's exciting that we won't be, if we get the contract, we won't be relegated to just the people who manage the money. Thank you.
Katie, we have some questions in the chat.
Okay. All right, I'll just start at the top and work my way down. So we have, if you have worked with one of the technical assistance consultants in the past on a different scope of work, do organizations need to disclose that information in their proposal? Joanna, can you take that one, please?
So if the question is, if you've worked with the technical assistant consultant in the past on a totally separate scope of work, then no, that doesn't need to be disclosed.
Okay, so because it can vary greatly, even from nonprofit to nonprofit, is there a guideline for salaries for the budget? Would it be what the nonprofit offers or more in line with a King County employee salary? This is really up to the nonprofit and the salary that they would fit into the bands that they have in their organization, that would fit into what works with all of the other positions that they currently have at their nonprofit. Joanna, do you or Jessica, do you want to add anything more about that?
No, I would say it is up to the individual agency. I think there might be some general guidance that maybe Joanna could speak to, because I think we are trying to move towards ensuring folks have living and thriving wages through all of our contracted programs. But I would defer to Joanna for specifics there.
Yeah, it's a very good question. We as DCHS are in the process of trying to get a sense of where wages are among nonprofit providers, and we've done a wage survey to get that information. And so we have some kind of long-term systemic plans for what we're going to do with that information once we have it organized, and we have some committees that are looking at it and deciding next best steps. But for the immediate purpose of this scope of work, we've kind of run into problems when we've tried to standardize salaries, just because every nonprofit has different payment structures within the realm of what they can afford. And so sometimes if we standardize it to try to make it a higher wage, it puts some nonprofits in a rough position where they may end up having to pay someone more than that person's supervisor. So, or if you happen to be working on this project versus another project, but the exact same level, one would earn way more than the other. So we've found that it's kind of caused more problems when we've tried to standardize within a program like that. But we are aware of the issue, and we are trying to make some systemic changes. Does that answer the question?
And then I also see as a follow-up, will the work be carved out based on an organization's previous experience in working with this RFP's priority population?
Sorry, Katie, that was
yeah.
actually me. That was a follow-up to the question that you answered at the beginning of this question period about different organizations being on the FAS team. So, and how those would be. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that that's what that was a follow-up to.
So if I'm understanding your question, actually, I'm not sure. Maybe if you can ask your question again. So
That's sure. Okay. Yeah. So my original question was, would there be multiple organizations, that were awarded the contract for the FAS team, which you answered. And then I guess you also sort of answered it in the sense that if you're on the FAS team, you would be expected to serve like all children. But then you did reference in the examples when you were talking about how a family could come into the subsidy, that they might be referred to an organization that had experience with those populations. So can you just expand on, I guess, that piece a little bit?
Yes. So when I mentioned that the FAST team will need to serve all families, it's to be clear that they should expect to serve families that may come in through their organization, but that may be referred to them through the subsidy administrator. But in the case of like an organization that serves a very specific population of families and has a lot of experience, say, serving student families, that they might propose to be a specialist for families who are students, and that families who are students would be directed towards them. Or let's say if a child has a developmental delay and needs support around inclusion in childcare, that an organization might have a specific, it might have specific experience or expertise serving families with children with developmental delays, for example. Any other questions? Great. All right, well, I want to thank you all for being here today, and remind you that if you do think of a question after you've signed off, you can email dchscontracts@kingcounty.gov. Those questions will go to Joanna, and we will be formally responding to every question that we receive, and those questions and answers will be posted as an addendum to the RFP in Zoom grants, so keep an eye out for that. And yeah, thank you all for being with us today, and we will end a few minutes early. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you as well.
Bye.